Did you know that every time you cook, you're performing a science experiment? Did you know that builders in upstate New York found centuries-old human skulls while digging? Or that Gary Paulson owned a poodle named Corky that protected him from a bear in Alaska? Stay tuned for these and other facts in today's webinar, Bones, Ballots, and Biographies, New Nonfiction for Every Reader. I'm Joel Franklin, and I'll be introducing today's webinar. But before we go further, I have a few housekeeping items. Be sure to turn off pop-up blockers in your browser, as these may cause problems when viewing the webinar. If you're experiencing technical problems, please use the Help button on the audience console, and the webinar tech team will get to you as soon as possible. If your screen becomes locked, try using F5 to refresh. If you're on a Mac, you can use Command R. Need credit? A certificate for continuing education credit is available in the certification folder. It will also be available in the archived presentation. Want to follow along? A handout of today's titles is in the resources list folder. If you have any questions or comments, you can send those in at any time via the red Q&A box. And please join the conversation on Twitter. You can tweet us at Junior Library Guild, that's JR Library Guild, and use the hashtag JLGWebinars. Today, our resident experts, Leslie Bermel and Deborah Ford, will give us a fast-paced overview on the latest and greatest nonfiction arriving soon in your mailbox. So, grab your wish list and let's listen to them talk about some of their favorite new titles.
Bones, Ballots, and Biographies. I declare, the more nonfiction I read, the less I realize I know. It's amazing the things that are being written out now. But let's start with Bones. The first title I want to talk about is Forgotten Bones, Uncovering a Slave Cemetery in, of all places, Albany, New York. Yes, there were slaves in Albany, and the cool thing was that they discovered this cemetery quite by accident. As Joel mentioned, workers were excavating, dig, and whoa, at the top of his dirt was a skull. So he thought, oh, that's not what I'm supposed to be finding. We better check on this, because a few years ago they had found another skull in the same area. So was it murder? Was it
a serial killer?
Something. They did think about that. So they had to call the police, they called an archaeologist, they called all kinds of people like that, and discovered a slave cemetery. And so this is the story of what they learned once they found these forgotten bones. The next book I want to talk about is Lillian's Right to Vote. Gorgeous, gorgeous book by Jonah Winter and Shane W. Evans, both award winners. And this book is about the celebration of the Voting Rights Act of 1965, about a grandma who was 100 years old.
What?
Yep, when she voted for the very first time.
Wow.
Honestly, though, this story is fiction. But I had to include it because it took the story of the real grandma, Lillian, and walked past. How did she get? How do we get to the voting rights of 1965? What happened to Lillian? And so there's a great author's note at the end about the actual facts in that story. And then Untamed. Now, we know lots of stuff about Jane Goodall. Remember that book? Oh,
Meet Jane.
Love that.
Patrick McDonald.
I couldn't read that book without, you get to the last page, you know?
Yeah.
And I choke up every time.
I know.
And so this gives you a lot more information about Jane Goodall. And one of the things I loved about it was that she just followed her passion. She wasn't a trained anthropologist or a scientist. She just was a girl who wanted to know more about animals. And she had a hero, Louis Leakey, and she followed him. And the next thing you know, she was working for him, and she learned all kinds of things, which, of course, led to conservation and so many things we know about chimpanzees. It was just a fascinating story. And one of the things I loved about this book especially is there's so much back matter. There are maps and things to read, and it just, again, it proves the point that research is all about the search. And you can't find the answers in just one place. And I think if your kids are reading this book, I think they'll get that.
You know, one of the things I liked about that book was the couple sidebars about how she blazed trails for other women.
Yes.
Like Jane Fossey in the silverback gorilla study that she has conducted.
Right.
And the woman who studied orangutans, too.
Right.
So I loved the fact that they pulled in a couple of other...
I love that, too. And you know what else I loved? I loved that they pulled in, Anita pulled in modern-day children. Like there was a girl, Madison and Rhiannon, and they joined the Roots and Shoots, which is, of course, the organization that Jane started. Mm-hmm. But what they did for their Girl Scout badge is they founded a project about endangered orangutans and went to the White House and all those kinds of things. Because in Girl Scout cookies is an oil that to get it endangers the life of the orangutans because it takes their environment away.
What?
Yeah.
I had no idea.
I had no idea, too.
I'm going to have to boycott girls. No, I'm not going to do that. I can't do that.
So how about you, Leslie? What you got?
Well, you know, it is football season, and I do love me a little Buckeye football. Sorry. O-H-I-O. That's a little something we do here in the state of Ohio. Hey, but did you know that in 1869, Rutgers and Princeton met for the very first time to have the very first football college game?
Oh.
I know. Rutgers beat Princeton. I'm sure that's going to go down in history as one of the most amazing feats ever. It was 6-4 that year. But, you know, ever since football's inception, there's been a constant problem with determining who's the best. And so from, 1869, it was until 1926 when there was an economics professor at the University of Illinois who developed a mathematical system to kind of determine, based on all kinds of different things. It was the Dickinson system, and that was in place for about 10 years. And then the Associated Press got involved, and they were using a poll with other sports writers to kind of determine who was the best, and that also lasted for about 10 years. And then the United Press, who was a competitor of the AP, decided that they were going to poll college coaches to see who was the best. So all these polls were kind of competing with each other, and rarely did they ever agree. But then in the late 1990s, the introduction of the Bowl Championship Series, or the BCS, helped to ensure more of a championship showdown to determine who was football's champion. There was still controversy.
Of course.
So it was not until 2012 when the BCS finally decided that they would have or hold a championship playoff game. Again, because there were so many controversies and different ways that teams were being measured and whatnot, that finally took place last year. And we all know who won that game, right? Might have been a Buckeye. Anyway, I really love this book because of the photographs in the book were amazing, and then also it looks back over the years at some of the greatest football championship games, and one of the ones that I loved the best was the one, of course, when the Buckeyes played the University of Miami and won that game, because my mother and I still fuss about that one because she's a Cane and I'm a Buckeye. But it was fun. The next book I'd like to talk about is a book called The Shift, One Nurse, 12 Hours, 4 Patients' Lives by Teresa Brown, who is an RN. Although she had a different career in her previous life, she has a PhD in English and taught at Tufts University, but decided to go back and get her RN and is working on an oncology floor at a hospital. She also writes columns for a newspaper. And this book was amazing. I absolutely loved reading about her day because I don't think we have a true appreciation of what nurses go through and how many hats that they wear, and also the shifting. You talk about the shift, but the 12-hour shift that they put in the day, that how many times they have to change their role depending upon who they're talking to, whether it be a doctor who is either taking their medical knowledge into account or completely dismissing it, as it were, and then also how they have to shift from patient to patient depending upon what the patient's needs are and their attitudes towards their treatment. And then even the people who are visiting the patients and what occurs with some of them. But this book follows Teresa through a 12-hour shift where she has 3 patients, Richard, Dorothy, and Sheila, and her shift nurse or charge nurse tells her there's an empty bed, and that last patient, if they come in, will be hers. And of course, that person does come in, and it turns out that it's Candace, who is called a PITA by the nurses. PITA is a pain in the, I won't say that last word.
Uh-oh.
Yeah. So this follows this nurse through these 4 patients, all in different stages of some type of cancer treatment. And I think really anyone who's thinking about becoming a nurse should read this book. It's really a thoughtful look at behind the scenes of what happens to nurses and how they encounter their days. It's the good, bad, and ugly of nursing. Great. Oh my goodness, this book is lots of fun. So, Edible Science, Experiments You Can Eat by Jody Wheeler-Tobin and Carol Tennant. So this book is chock full of science experiments you can eat. Well, at least most of them. Some of them I wouldn't eat because it's really disgusting. But I love the fact that your kitchen is a science lab. So I'm not talking about like the head of lettuce that you've left in your crisper too long, or the leftovers in the fridge that have turned a particular shade of green. But it's every time you're cooking, you're doing a science experiment. So this is the mixing and unmixing, solids and liquids, actions and reactions, biology experiments. One of my favorites is a dancing soup, where you take dried fruit. Some of them you have to cut really small, and then you combine those pieces in a bowl with lemon lime soda. And as the carbon dioxide attaches itself to the ridges in that dried fruit, it brings the fruit to the surface, and then the carbon dioxide escapes, and the fruit sinks to the bottom of the soup again. So it's a lot of fun. Each of these science experiments has a difficulty level. Sometimes it's very easy. Sometimes it requires adult supervision. Sometimes it's medium, so it doesn't require a ton of adult supervision, but it also includes lists of supplies and instructions and recipes in some cases. There's a little call-out section on each of the experiments that gives you the science scoop. Explains why something's happening and what to watch for and the science behind the activity. So it's loads of fun.
Cool. Maybe I should talk about that book at the Science Teachers Conference this week.
I think maybe you should.
And I could do that experiment.
You could.
That would be fun.
There might be a couple of experiments in there, and then you could eat it while you were on stage.
Well, there you go.
Maybe.
On a completely different note.
Yes?
Imagine.
Ooh. Yeah.
That you were at work.
Yeah.
And you heard something that you really wish, didn't hear,
you can't unhear it.
Those things, and you can't unhear some things. That's exactly right. And this is what happened in the case of Dan Ellsberg. He worked for the government, and he found out some things he wished he didn't know about the government. And then he went to fight in the Vietnam War and saw things with his own 2 eyes. And when he came back and got more information and was on the inside, he decided he couldn't live with it anymore. He had to do something to stop the war if he had to do it himself, and he was willing to throw himself under the bus to do it.
Wow.
Yes. So this is the story of the Pentagon Papers, and fascinating. And, of course, it's Steve Schinken, and he's just the master of narrative nonfiction.
He's pretty amazing.
It just is amazing. He goes all the way up through Watergate and Lyndon B. Johnson. It reads like a political who's who.
Wow. And this book was longlisted for the National Book Award. Did it make the short list too?
Oh, you're asking for my memory.
I know. I'm sorry. So we know for sure it was longlisted for the National Book Award.
For sure it was. But I'm getting to a place now where if I forget much more, I'll be able to plan my own surprise party. Yep.
Great getting old, isn't it, Deb?
It is. It is a hoot. But I can surely remember this.
Okay.
Oh, my gosh. Symphony for the City of the Dead. This is the story of the siege of Leningrad. And every time I think about it, my nose flares and my ears get red, and I just think not nice things about Stalin.
And y'all, she's warned me that I may have to cut her off because she's going to go on about this book.
Yeah, I'm going to try really hard not to. But I tell you, this is really an important book. I learned so much from reading this story. It's a story of Dmitry Shostakovich.
Ooh.
I have to look really hard. Shostakovich. It's just like it looks, but you got to think
Yeah,
Russian
that's that one, yeah.
when you say it. So this is his story of he was a symphony composer, and it's a story of how his symphonies saved Russia. It changed the course of the war for those who could hear his music. And of course, being such a musician, a musician myself, and music is so important to me, that I was amazed. And there's so many things about the war and Stalin and the invasion of Leningrad and things like that I just didn't know. And part of the reason I didn't know is, again, because of M.T. Anderson's research. One of the things, there's pages, look at that. You can't see, but I'm showing Leslie. There are pages and pages of source notes and bibliography.
He did his homework for sure.
He absolutely did. And a lot of this stuff didn't come out until 2002. And so last week when I was weeding a library in California, we found a book on Stalin, and one of the first things I did was look it up and see about Leningrad. It's not even in there. Weeded.
Out the door.
Yep, out the door. Incomplete.
And that book was also longlisted for the National Book Award, folks, Symphony for the Dead. So the short list was just announced a couple weeks or a week ago. So check the short list too. But regardless, both of these books are amazing. And
Absolutely. Great. This one, of course, the Leningrad book is really hard. It's definitely YA, and it will hurt your heart. Cannibalism.
Ooh.
And people who what do they call it? Person. It's like cannibalism, but they captured people so they could kill and eat them.
Nice.
Yeah, it was bad. It was hard.
I'm
it was
glad
horrible.
I already had lunch.
War is a terrible
for
thing.
those of you who have not had lunch yet.
Yes. Speaking of war, another thing we didn't know much about war, we know now through the eyes of a photographer. And so Omaha Beach on D-Day is actually 3 different stories about Robert Capa. The first section is a graphic novel, and so it tells about the Robert Capa, who was a photographer for Life magazine, and how he went about capturing the pictures. And then in the next section are the pictures, 11 pictures. And the reason why we have 11 pictures is there was a boo-boo in the development lab at Life.
Wow.
And he sent all these rolls of film, and they were all damaged. And the only ones left are these 11 pictures we have. And then there's this whole mystery of the soldier who's pushing his life vest, and who was he? And so then the third part goes back into the life of Robert Capa and the things that we know now about the war and how we found out who that guy was. Yeah, it was way cool, way cool.
Well, so Smart and Spineless was kind of an interesting book for me, too. So this is Exploring Invertebrate Intelligence, and it's by Ann Downer. When we think about smart creatures, we rarely think about invertebrates as being smart or being particularly intelligent. But it's amazing the abilities these animals have with not very large brains or with no brain whatsoever. Scientists are using what they learn from these creatures to come up with new ways to tackle old problems. I learned something from this book that I did not know, and that's that about 90% of the Earth's animals are invertebrates. They consist of things like earthworms and spiders and octopuses, and each one of these animals has its own story in the book, and I kind of love the fact that a spider, and we're going to talk about spider a little bit later, was able to adjust how she hunted because she realized who her prey was and that she needed to be very smart at how to attack it. There's also a wasp in the book that analyzed her surroundings and was able to make a last-minute decision to avoid an obstacle. An octopus that enjoys playing with Legos. Really, it's pretty amazing. Deb, do you like coffee, right? You
I love coffee.
Yeah. Did you know that some honeybees do too?
No.
Yeah. Honeybees are going to the coffee plant, and actually some citrus trees also contain trace amounts of caffeine too. The scientists have realized that those bees know what they were sipping and that they remember the scent of that coffee plant flower longer after the reward of that caffeinated nectar. So regardless of all that, I think it's kind of interesting that scientists are continuing to study invertebrates because of the benefit that they've been bringing to scientists as they serve as model organisms for the study of neural development in animals, and they help in the study of genetics. It's a pretty interesting read. And talk about interesting reads.
So what's this?
Gary Paulsen, oh gosh, he's a master storyteller. He's won the Newbery Honor for Hatchet and 2 other books that are escaping me right now. It's that memory thing that we're both dealing with. But what I didn't know about Gary Paulsen is that he's an adventurer, and I guess I should have probably known that because of some of the books that he's written. But I guess I didn't realize that he'd competed in 2 Iditarods, and he's been lost in the Minnesota wilderness and has climbed Bighorn Mountains. But one of the things about this book that I think is so touching, and I do love my dogs, is that he gives credit to his companions, his animal companions, about protecting him throughout all of these adventures. So we talked and intimated at the beginning of the hour or the half hour that Gary Paulsen's pet toy poodle, Corky, whom he adopted. In fact, he saved the day before this poor little dog was to be put to sleep. He was an 8-pound toy poodle, and he was covered with sores, and he had rotten teeth, and Gary took him immediately to the vet and spent $1,200 to put this dog to rights, and he was already 10 years old. But Corky saved Gary Paulsen's life by protecting him from a grizzly bear, not once but twice. And I think that Corky and Gary obviously were meant for each other. But these are funny and sad stories, and they all revolve around Gary's companion animals. I loved it.
Me too.
So Tree of Wonder, The Many Marvelous Lives of a Rainforest Tree by Kate Messner. This is illustrated by Simona Molzani, which that last name is a little tough for me to say, but I absolutely love this cute little picture book about one almondrow tree that grows in the rainforest, that it helps to support animals with food and shelter, and there's like 1,000 different living things that this tree supports. It's done in a cute little way. So it's one almondrow tree, and then when you turn the page, you see 2 flocks of great green macaws will feast on the almondrow's fruit, and then you turn the page, and it's 4 keel-billed toucans who also eat the fruit from the tree, and then 8 howler monkeys. So you're doing rainforest math every turn of the page. There's a pattern, and each page turn is doubling the numbers. So the art's vivid and engaging, and the graphics that support the math are amazing. Love the book.
Gorgeous. And smart. Back to ballots and voting. From our title, Voice of Freedom, Fannie Lou Hamer. They called her the spirit of the civil rights movement, and it tells her story as she grew up in Mississippi and had to move for various reasons, safety among them. Mm-hmm. The first time she cast a vote was for herself. I love that. She ran for Congress in the Mississippi Freedom Democratic Party. And so it talks about, just like Lillian in our first ballot story, how she didn't give up, and she sang, and she just was that voice. Great story for our middle grade readers. Tommy, the Gun That Changed the World. Holy cow. Again, I just am amazed at the things that I don't know. Karen Blumenthal, again, did her homework about the story of the invention of the Tommy gun, which came about because a guy thought that there ought to be an automatic fire weapon that would service us better in the war. Mm-hmm. And so he bounced it off the U.S. government after World War I, and they didn't want anything to do with it. Well, they decided, well, we're just going to do it anyway. We're just going to build it themselves. So we got some private investors and built the Tommy gun, named for Thompson, who was the military man behind the gun. But, unfortunately, the gun got into the wrong hands.
Oh.
Yes. And so now the gun is, mobster guys. Jimmy Hoffa and Babyface Nelson and Bonnie and Clyde and all those people. And so they said, so suddenly now we're going to have gun laws, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so So fine, they just stole them from the police station. And so the more I'm reading this book, the more I'm thinking, these discussions they were having in the 20s and the 30s and the 40s about these guns
maybe the same discussions
are
now.
exactly the same discussions we are having now. And it goes all the way up to Sandy Fort and that terrible shooting there, and the same discussions that we're having about where does responsibility lie? Is it federal government? Is it state? Is it a personal thing? Fascinating story. And last but almost not least, for me, Child Soldier, a very surprising book about boys and girls who are used in war. It's a graphic novel, and but it's not for little kids. It's in our middle grade group, in our nonfiction middle, and it tells the story of a boy named Michael who lived in the Congo when he was kidnapped while playing soccer at his school, and they forced him to be a child soldier. In fact, they blindfolded him, put a gun in his hands, and made him pull the trigger. He ended up killing one of his little playmates.
Oh.
It was something he could almost never get over.
I was going to say, that will scar you for life.
It did absolutely scar him for life, and eventually he was able to get away from his kidnappers and run back to his home, but it was never the same again. And so finally, he and some of his family members are able to immigrate to Canada, where he runs into a teacher who says, you know what, if you talk about this might help you.
Mm-hmm.
And so in order to help himself and to raise awareness about what's going on out in the world, he talks now about his story, and he's trying to make a difference.
That's awesome. Talk about awesome. Holy mackerel, this book, Sitting Bull. This is Lakota warrior and defender of his people. It's by S.D. Nelson. Sitting Bull was quoted as saying, I have seen nothing that a white man has, houses or railways or clothing or food, that is as good as the right to move in the open country and live in our own fashion. Sitting Bull lived from 1831 to 1890, and he was one of the greatest Lakota Sioux warriors and chiefs who've ever lived. He was instrumental in the war against the white man, and he and Crazy Horse were the last Lakota Sioux chiefs to surrender their people to the U.S. government and to resort to living on a reservation. This book is filled with gorgeous art. I loved the art in this book, and I loved the photographs. Photography, of course, was just coming of age when Buffalo Bill, Sitting Bull was around, but one of the pictures that I really loved was with Buffalo Bill, where the two of them were touring together during a Wild West show tour of 1885. Buffalo Bill and Sitting Bull became friends, and Buffalo Bill gave Sitting Bull his favorite circus horse, which was treasured. But, you know, it was interesting to me that Sitting Bull was killed by his own people. And so he was wounded in a fight with people who were trained to be policemen for the white men. And like your Leningrad book or your Stalin book, this one is gonna hurt my heart a little bit to talk about. Wild at Heart is about Mustangs and the young people who were fighting to save them, by Terry Farley, with photographs by Melissa Farlow. So wild Mustangs have roamed over parts of Nevada, Utah, Idaho, California, Oregon, and Wyoming since, forever, obviously, but since 1971, there have been over 300,000 that have been rounded up and have been removed from the West. And during these roundups, many Mustangs die of injuries and or exhaustion. And some of them are sold for slaughter, which I find really hard to understand. More than half of America's living Mustangs have been branded and neutered for life in government corrals. There have been charges of neglect and cruelty and trafficking and illegal horse meat. They're disappearing from our country. There was a woman at the very accidentally found out about these wild Mustangs being transported for slaughter and being sold for meat for dogs or chicken food, and she became an outspoken advocate. And during her time at the helm, she actually was able to pass two laws in 1959 and 1971, both respectively, to protect the Mustangs. But now it's still not enough. They're still being rounded up and slaughtered, and their children who are rescuing these Mustangs and are becoming outspoken advocates in Vilma's place. So it's a beautifully done book. The photographs are amazing. The stories are even more so. Last but not least for me, actually I have two more books, don't I?
Yep.
Freedom in Congo Square.
We're almost going to make our 30 minutes.
Hey, that'll be amazing, won't it? So Freedom in Congo Square is a poetic picture book. It's set in New Orleans during the times of slavery, where slaves were forced to work 6.5 days in a week. By law, they were given a half day off every Sunday afternoon. So the book starts off by saying, Mondays are for slopping and feeding, and Tuesdays are for this, Wednesdays for that, and every day we're thinking about our half day and Sunday at Congo Square. So Congo Square was a place where the slaves were able to congregate and commune by law. So they chose to flock to this place called Congo Square. It was a market, it was a gathering place, African music. People could come and share their news. They would dance and sing through their half day off. It was a communication hub. I think it's kind of interesting that Congo Square, after slavery was abolished, was still active as a musical outlet for people. Brass band concerts were performed there by Creole musicians. It's now part of the Louis Armstrong Park, which was named after the jazz great, and you know that jazz kind of got its start there, of course, in New Orleans, but it was also based on African American music. So it's a wonderfully done picture book for kids. And, geez, I'm trying to love spiders. Maybe not. This book is chock full of amazing arachnid facts. It says so right on the cover. I'm trying really hard to love spiders. Yeah, no, not really. Although I do have an appreciation for some of their amazing abilities. Now, did you know that spiders have 8 eyes? The better to see you with.
Better to see you with.
Mm-hmm. Did you know they build their houses out of protein-packed silk that they produce right out of their bodies?
Isn't that
amazing?
Insane?
It is. It's almost like having your own house built with your own human hair, and then you catch your food with that hair in your house. Isn't that gross? It's
wow.
It's pretty nasty. I also thought this was nasty too, because I really don't like ticks, and they get on dogs, and then they get on you, and it's really gross. And I didn't realize that they also are cousins with scorpions. So things
I didn't know that too.
I'm still not really loving. It's like double yuck right there. But here's some things that I did kind of appreciate, like the fact that they can eat 75 pounds of bugs in a year's time. I mean, I think that's pretty cool.
That's amazing.
And I think it's also cool that some farmers use spiders to eat invader insects, instead of using chemicals to kill those.
Organic farming.
There we go. Yeah. So, yeah, I don't know that I really still love spiders a whole lot, but I'm trying.
You appreciate them.
I appreciate them.
From a distance.
They're still not welcome in my house.
Well, there you go. And last but not least for me, My Story, My Dance. This is the story of Robert Battle's journey to Alvin Alley, which is a dance company. And it's written by husband and wife team Lisa Klein Ransom and James Ransom, forward by the dancer Robert Battle himself. But I love this story, not just because it's a great picture book biography, but because it, again, is just, it gives us the whole kind of American dream. Robert was a kid who came from a large family, and he had polio. His legs were bowed. He was, they made fun of him, and who would ever think that somebody who started out with polio would end up not only being a great dancer, but now he's the artistic director, just like Alvin Alley. It's just inspirational, great story that your kids will love, love, love.
Oh gosh, so there's some of our favorite upcoming titles. If only we had more time, we could talk about...
Oh, we could talk about How to Swallow a Pig. That's the one that has the millipedes where you chew them up and you put them on you and they keep you from being bitten by mosquitoes. Or we could talk about Egg, which was amazing, all the facts about eggs.
Which came first, the chicken or the egg?
We don't have time for that for sure.
Or we talk about the Bookish, about Harlem's very first bookstore.
Yep. Or the octopus scientist, where we learn about the multiple hearts and the ink.
I actually love to partner that one with the Spineless book.
Oh, perfect.
Smart and Spineless.
That's a great combo.
And oh my gosh, the Boys in the Boat. I loved Boys in the Boat, about the boys who got together and took on Hitler's German crew team. Whoop, whoop, whoop. And Enchanted Air.
Enchanted Air. So many titles.
There is. Gee whiz. Next time.
Remember to check our website after the webcast for the post-presentation post, where you'll find a list of all the books with links to their book detail pages. And if they have mature content, remember, if you're logged in, you'll see that. So you'll know about some of the terrible things that we talked about.
All right, Leslie and Deb, thanks so much. As always, that was wonderful, and I want to thank you, our participants, as well for joining us today. And be sure to mark your calendars on November 19th at 3 p.m. Eastern. It's our next JLG webinar series. Kira Parrott, editor at our sister magazine, School Library Journal, will join Deb in a conversation about this year's award contenders. So bound to be fun there. And check your email soon for registration information. And if you want to know more about JLG and its services, you can contact your account rep or send an email to sales@juniorlibraryguild.com. Tomorrow, you'll receive an automatic email regarding today's webinar. If you follow the link, you can watch the archived webinar and print your certificate of attendance after 10 minutes of viewing. Until next time, happy reading.